Hello and welcome to Rogue Voice, conversations that inspire and connect. I'm Tiffany Cooper.
I'm Jessica Gomez. Over the last 20 years, I think people have become much more aware about where their food is grown, how it's grown. I know when I was growing up, my parents were into everything organic, and nobody really understood what that actually meant. They were like this trendsetters, and all of our family made fun of us.
Absolutely. Growing up, we didn't have a concept of what organic was until later when I went to college and I started learning about where my food came from and the importance of having organic foods, and then working with an alternative medicine doctor where she said, no, it's very important. Your produce, those things need to be organic. And then she kind of explained that and the purpose of, your health. But to help us learn about sustainable farming and how innovative practices have the potential to deliver measurable benefits to us all, we have two very special guests. Please let me introduce Chris Hardy, owner and operator of Hardy Seeds, Joan Thorndike, owner of Mera Gardens. Welcome both to the show.
Oh, looks like our guests are a little bit delayed.
Oh,
here we are. Hey,
hey,
there you guys are.
Well, welcome both to the show.
Yes, welcome.
Hi. Morning.
Good morning. Joan, I think you were still on mute, so go ahead and unmute yourself. I'm so excited to have you both here to talk about this. In addition to like the health benefits and everything, that the farming practices that we are doing now really impact the environment as well. And I think it's an important issue. Some people are aware, a lot of people aren't about that impact. But I want to start with you, Joan. Can you tell us a little bit about Mera Gardens, how long you've been farming flowers, and what does Mera mean?
I love that question. Thank you. I started farming in '92, so 28 years ago, and I went directly to just farming flowers, which was a very odd thing to do, but it was very clear in my mind. I mean, who doesn't love flowers? I had, at that time, my girls were 3 and 5 years old. I needed a job, but I didn't want to park them in childcare. It seemed like if I farmed, I could take them with me. And fast forward 28 years, I'm still at it, and evolve. Over the years, you evolve, how you farm. I inherited the name Mera Gardens, and I thought the first thing I should do is change that name. I mean, who knows what it means? Who knows how to spell it? But as a farmer, my first question was, who am I going to sell these flowers to? And I think it's a really important question that every farmer should ask themselves before they dig a trowel in the ground. And very few do, because the reality is there's a bunch of us on this planet that are drawn to farming, and we want to do it. We want to grow cucumbers, but it doesn't occur to us, suddenly in the summer, all those hundreds of cucumbers are going to come on, and what am I going to do with them? So I started, right, but I mean, you're going to have a lot. So the first thing I did was started figuring out who I would sell to. And there was name recognition among the florists in the Rogue Valley, because Mera Gardens was actually started by a man called Lenny White, Lenny, married to Marilyn, M-E. That's where the L-E and the M-E come from. So Lenny and Marilyn started Mera Gardens. And Lenny leased land from a man who owned, at that time, Geppetto's restaurant, which is an old restaurant, a former restaurant in Ashland, Ron Roth. And he farmed there for many years. Actually, I think it was less than 10 years, but he did what no one else had done, actually almost across the US, was grow domestic flowers for local sales. And he had greenhouses, he extended the season. That's what you do greenhouses for, or hoop houses really, because you don't have any energy input. You just use the heat from the sun. and he would sell the most incredible flowers. And Ron Roth's premise was that anyone he rented to had to be an organic grower, not a certified organic grower, because you're not selling to the wholesale market. That's a whole separate subject. But he eventually, Lenny left, and other people kind of dabbled with La Mera Gardens, and then it pretty much sat abandoned for 3 years. And when I went to him, he said, sure, yeah, you can have an acre and a third, and you can manage it. I had no idea how to manage an acre and a third, and the weeds were up to here.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was a year of discovery, finding everything, and also learning from Lenny. But back to the question of the name, when I went to Flower Time, and I mean, I have to point out that in this small valley, we have flower shops that have been around for almost 30 years, which is a very unusual trend for the United States. So Euphoria Flowers and Flower Time and Susie's Medford Flower, and well, there've been some flower shops that have come and gone, but and the woman who owns Penny and Lulu, which is quite a well-known flower shop, I mean, she started Susie's Medford Flower. Her name is Susie. So, okay, name recognition, I'm just gonna have to stick with it.
Okay. Well, Chris, I'd like to shift with you for a minute and ask you, could you talk a little bit about your family history in organic farming and seed saving?
Sure. Yeah, both my grandfathers were organic growers. One was an organic gardener, an amazing organic gardener. Like so much so that people would travel from far away to come and check out his garden and taste the tomatoes and the amazing produce that they grew. My other grandfather was on the other side of the state in Iowa, closer to the Wisconsin, Illinois side, and right on the Mississippi River. And they grew, Grandma and Grandpa grew alfalfa, and they also grew corn and oats, barley, and
oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they had many countless heads of cattle and varieties of livestock and waterfowl, like ducks. They had geese and guineas and lambs and pigs and milking cows, and just had everything. But he saved his own seed there on the farm every year, and that's how they got by year to year, and they improved their seeds. And this is like kind of the remnants of agriculture before it shifted for many farmers the size of my grandfather's, shifted towards chemically intensive, now is GMO production. So they didn't use synthetic fertilizers. They used all the animal manure. It was completely closed loop, very diversified farming.
Wow. So you actually grew up. I mean, this farming truly is in your DNA. We can actually say that.
Yeah, trying to remember the first time I drove a tractor was probably when I was about 6, by myself, maybe 7, but
yeah, I say DNA. You have
on my grandpa's lap when I was about 4.
Well, right then and there on his lap, there was the makings of what you were going to do for the rest of your life. I mean, clearly.
Yeah. That and my world travels to all the countries I've been to. I've traveled to a lot of farming communities in almost every continent, and it's just inspired me so much to really see what is going on, the bigger picture, our food system, their food system, and just like looking at the soil and looking at the health of their community, and then coming back here and tuning into what's going on. It's like,
that's amazing, because I think about, when you think about food security and health society, I think about China and their farming system, and then, or India, and even here in Minneapolis, well, Minnesota, we have a food, insecurity. So that's something to think about.
They've been doing things over there for thousands of years, and it sounds like growing rice. The way they do it is just like, it's so much more connected to the bigger picture instead of isolating out all the components and then just like kind of monocropping things. They're like, well, no, we need diversification in the system for the system to work and to be whole.
Yeah, I guess just like any other ecosystem, you know, once it starts to get out of balance, you really, I mean, it's a continuous struggle. Joan, I'd like to kind of turn to you for a minute. Can you talk about what methods that you use as an organic farmer to deal with, you know, pests and some of the things that, you know, have, you know, we've in the past handled with, you know, a lot of chemicals and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage that?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I have never doubted that I would be an organic farmer. That it never crossed my mind to be anything but that. And I kind of resent the name organic because it's the way it has always been. We should call the other chemical farming.
That's a good point.
That's a very good point.
And, you know, there's the word organic versus conventional. What is conventional about conventional? It's chemical. So once you get that in your head, then you have a conversation with either the insects or the weeds that get in the way of what you're trying to do. And the reason you want to get a handle on insects and weeds as a farmer is efficiency. If I'm going to harvest a 150-foot bed of some flower, having to skip over the weeds hampers my movement. I need to move faster. I only have 12 hours in a day to harvest. And insects ruin your crops. So you first start by saying, okay, we have to come to an agreement here, you bugs and you weeds, because the reality is when I turn my back on them, they're going to be back. And we have to recognize that there are a lot more of them now because our winters are warm. Our winters are relatively warm. It used to be that winters killed the eggs of a lot of insects, and now we have more and more insects. I'm not going to get into discussion of climate change, but we just have to accept, I'm not accepting it, but I'm recognizing that problem. And so you use your eyes to see what you have to see. And then we have to follow, we're certified organic growers. The reasons we're certified, I mean, for your listenership, there's always that thing about certified versus sustainable and all that. And it has to do with who you market to. For us, we sell flowers in Portland. We sell flowers to the Ashland Community Food Store, which is an organic store. So we have to show that we're certified. And it's a very onerous process, which, by the way, chemical growers don't have to go through. And it's difficult to get that. But if you are an organic grower, then you have to follow the mandates or the recommendations of what's called OMRI, which is the Organic Materials Review Institute. It's an international organization that tells you what you can and cannot use as a organic grower. And here in the Valley, we get our products, we do spray. There's this myth that you're an organic grower, therefore you don't spray. That's not true. You do spray, it's just what you spray. And I always think in plain terms, if I spray, my children can still run through that field as opposed to a chemical spray. We obtain our products from a place here called Helena, which will wholesale large amounts. And you have to treat those sprays as if they're dangerous. Like you really follow the instructions. 1 teaspoon per 5 gallons means 1 teaspoon because they're plant-based and they're very, very strong. And that's why I object to so many chemical products being sold at Weimar on the shelves. Who reads those little tiny words on there that say it's dangerous? So basically it's that I walk, I watch, I observe, and I try to interrupt the life cycle of the bugs I don't want there. And we also only get rid of weeds where we are going to be harvesting. it's not possible to keep 10 acres weed free.
So you brought up a really important, I think, point, and something I want to ask both of you about is the cost of kind of doing things in an organic way, right? And that where does the cost, is the cost because you have to do things differently? Is the cost related to regulation? Where is that additional cost coming from? Chris, maybe you can address that.
Yeah, the cost in our operation is not only because we produce a wide diversity of seeds, and all those, it's a lot of start, stop. You know, we grow small blocks of each crop, and when we're producing the seed, it's a lot about keeping that seed consolidated such that it does not cross with other varieties. So we need to have the distance and the isolation. We have three different farm plots. And so we're able to work within that isolation, but it's still a lot of crunching numbers and figuring out, well, where is this going to go and how's it going to go and how's it going to fit in with our rotation for our soil health and for pest management. But it's also about the it just gets it's a little more complicated the more diversified, but it is also not putting all your eggs in one basket, and it also helps break pest cycles and supports pollinator health. So that's why we're so diversified, and that's why it's complicated.
Well, can I piggyback off of that? Because I'm curious about farmer seed system. When I was researching that, can you give us a brief breakdown what that is?
Yeah, so in Southern Oregon, so if you think of the terms of a food shed, your food shed is what maybe, you know, it depends upon how you want to define that. We know that a watershed is from this peak over here to this peak over here, and all the water that's in between that feeds the communities that live within those two ridge tops. A seed shed might be something that's closer to like the food shed, and maybe we could define that as like within 100 miles, as many people do, and as our growers market uses as a criteria for their growers. It's like people that are within 100-mile radius. And so, I mean, we could break that down even further and look at the pollen shed and figure out like what is being produced within that area that might go onto a neighbor's property. And, you know, we need to have these conversations, and we work together with the Southern Oregon Seed Growers Association to develop understanding of who is producing what and how do we keep those crops isolated so that everybody can have a relationship to produce the yield of seeds that they desire. But those seeds are something that we are working on here in this valley, not only as export, as a specialty crop of which people can produce to you know, produce and make some economics work for their farm, but it's also something that we are consciously working towards adapting locally. And that is the real gem of seeds. Unless you're into, again, the GMOs and the chemical systems that really they're not taking into consideration bioregional or even regional growing and microclimates. Those are just seeds that are grown anywhere in the United States. Doesn't matter, because there are a very small handful of those types of seeds, whether it's GMO corn, GMO soy, GMO sugar beets, GMO canola, or even hybrids in many cases. There's a much smaller selection, whereas open pollinated seeds that most of the producers in our valley, including our farm, are growing are open pollinated. Those are seeds that everybody can then grow out themselves and save and adapt to their growing region.
That's hopeful. Thank you for I've been wondering. You broke it down so beautifully. I want to shift really quickly to you, Joe. We have an audience viewer question. They ask, great point about chemicals being used in gardens. What are some simple tips someone at home can do to support organic or farm to fork concept in their own backyard gardens?
In your garden, stay away from the by-mart shelves. The Grange Co-op is a pretty good resource. Keep it simple in terms of what products you use in your garden. Go out to your garden, visit your garden, look at the problem, analyze the problem. When it comes to insects, what you're trying to do is disrupt the reproductive cycle. So let's say you see an infestation of aphids on something. Aphids usually come in the spring. So part of you can say, well, it's a problem of the spring. As soon as the rain stops, the sun comes out, the aphids will go away. Is one way to deal with them. And the other would be, no, I want to get rid of those. So the easiest thing to do is to drown them with a dilution of dishwashing soap and water. It's sticky, it suffocates them. And your other question was about farm to fork, was about which I'm interpreting as how do you eat from your garden?
I assume that's what they mean, yes.
Eat as much as you can from your garden. Well, there are two types of gardens. There's the garden where you produce food, and the garden there where you produce flowers and shrubs and pollinator farms, which I think are different and are somewhat related to what you can do, because where I live, there's no point me we used to grow a vegetable garden, but the trees have grown so much, they produce shade. So don't fight the system. I can't grow food here, but there is the growers market. There's wonderful shops. I can't grow big flowers anymore because the deer eat them. Don't fight it. Go to the market. Go buy yourself some flowers.
Yeah.
It's also why I moved to a farm, because I wanted to grow flowers. And I think if I just can digress a little bit to the question of cost, because I think it's relevant to this farm to fork issue, there is the question of cost, and that organics tend to be more expensive. I have worked really hard at that not being the rule. I think if you say, well, organics are expensive, it eliminates a huge swath of the population cannot access organic. And organic should not be a status symbol. It should not be exclusively available to a certain segment of the population. It should be available to everyone. So how do we as farmers keep our costs down? I did the math once. 25% of our cost, of our gross, 25% of our gross went into labor to weed. That's a huge chunk. 1/4 of your money goes to paying people to weed. So we've come up with other systems in farms, which you see in the Rogue Valley, which is laying plastic. And that is the difference between being an organic grower and being what the new buzzword is, which is a regenerative grower that is leaving the ground you farm on better than when you found it. Not the same, better. And we have to get past that problem of the plastic. So the cost has to do with that. USD organic certification costs us 2% of gross. If you are a chemical grower, you do not pay a percentage of your gross to be certified conventional or chemical grower. So we actually switched our agent now because we just couldn't afford that. So there's a wonderful USDA, which stands for United States Department of Agriculture, National Organics Program. And the good thing about that is it's an equalizer. Across the country, if all of us are USDA approved certified organic growers, then we're all on the same page. There's no explaining, oh, well, I'm Rogue Valley organic. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's great. And I want to ask, that was incredible, really. I feel like we could have another segment just on that alone. I want to ask both of you, but I'm going to start with you, Chris. What advice do you have for the next generation of farmers as we wrap up?
Advice I have is to find a piece of land, find you know, whether you're leasing or buying that land, and develop a relationship with it is really important. So relationships are really important with the landowner if you're leasing, and that seems to be the standard these days. Are people are leasing land. So find somebody that really aligns with the vision that you have as a farmer, and that's sometimes hard to find these days, because people, you know, you might have a conversation with a landowner, and then what you thought you understood, what they really valued most, a year later has changed, or at least they didn't express it a year earlier. And so now it just kind of isn't a good alignment. And that's kind of a bummer, because when, like Joan's saying, we put a lot of time into weed management, just to, you know, it takes a lot of effort. And I just think of how over the years I've bounced from piece of land to piece of land because of not finding that right landowner. And so what happens is that we have to recreate the irrigation system. We have to refigure out what works as far as the pests, and well, we can't grow that because we've got all these other challenges that come from the soil, and weeds, especially weeds. And we've been really good over the past 4 years that I've been leasing this one piece of land in Ashland, on the north side of Ashland, is doing weed management. And now it's like, it's a blessing because we have very low weed pressure. And so we're not having to do all this craziness and just have the weeds just explode. And so that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
And Joan, what would you like quickly?
Well, I would piggyback on what Chris said. The reality is, for us farmers in the Rogue Valley, we are urban farmers. I'm not talking about the Applegate and Williams, because their land availability is different. But let's say right here in the urban area, we are urban farmers, and as urban farmers, we're mostly leasing land. We might be lucky enough to be buying land. There is that for sure. But you asked about a new future generation farmer. Is exactly what Chris said. Find that piece of land that you're going to have to lease. Get it really clear on what your landlord expects of you. Ron Roth was very clear with me. You cannot use Roundup here. This is an organic farm. And he stuck to it for all the years I was there. But we have since moved farms. The most dramatic was last year, when the land that we were leasing, we leased 3 plots of land in the Rogue Valley. And one of our very good landlords was retiring, selling her land. And we had to move trees and shrubs. I mean, 12-foot tall, 100 of them, 1,000 of them. It was terrible. And we're paying for it now because it's like starting over. And our big plot of land in Ashland, the landlord is growing cannabis. So that has its own. Now there's a big greenhouse that took over our greenhouse. There's pieces of land that are being taken out of production of our flowers and produce to go into cannabis. And, that wasn't the original intent, but it's there. So you have to have some flexibility, and ideally you buy your land. And the first question you ask is, where's my access to water? How old is the water right? Without water, you're not going to be able to do anything. Or does the MID, the Medford Irrigation District or Talent Irrigation District, does that ditch come anywhere close to the land that you're getting?
That's wonderful. I mean, this has been, I truly feel like I want, just from my personal knowledge, I want another hour with each of you separately. But unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank you, Joan and Chris, for taking the time to learn more about, helping us learn more about the organic and sustainable farming. I'm sure our listeners, as much as Jessica and I, enjoyed learning from both of you. So remember to tune in to Rogue Voice online every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and connect with us on our YouTube channel and Facebook, where you can send us a message or leave a comment. We want to hear from you. So tune in. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.